Happy Friday. I hope that you had an absolutely wonderful week. Today I'm going to actually talk about two books that are seemingly completely disconnected. One is about Mary Wollstonecraft and her daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. And the other takes place in 1933 Berlin, 1936 Paris, and 1944 New York. And while seemingly these two books would have nothing in common, I'm really excited to share with you the chord that was connected between them for me when I read them both last spring. So let's look at it. The first book is Her Lost Words by Stephanie Marie Thornton. Stephanie Marie Thornton is a phenomenal author. I really enjoy her work. She has work under both Stephanie Thornton and Stephanie Marie Thornton. What she wrote under Stephanie Thornton is all based in ancient times. Women of Genghis Khan, the women who supported Alexander the Great, a Egyptian pharaoh who was a woman, and a empress of the Byzantine Empire. All four absolutely fascinating reads. And then under the name Stephanie Marie Thornton, she has written books that are about a president's daughter, a president's wife, and a spy during the Cold War. And then her latest book, which came out last spring, is Her Lost Words, which is about Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Mary Wollstonecraft was an author, and she lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and she was a well-educated woman in a time when most women didn't have a high-level education, and she lived in conservative England, traveled to France during the Revolution, and even spent time in a prison there, and she spent a lot of her time writing about the things that she saw in her experiences. And one of the things that she wrote was a vindication of the rights of women, which is a piece about how women should have the same rights as men and how they're equal. That was quite a big deal in the 18th and 19th century, and just an absolutely forward-thinking, not only thing to think, but to put it into words, and it coming from a woman was scandalous. Her daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, tragically never knew her mom because she died in childbirth, and she spent her life trying to learn about her mom, and that's what this book is about, is the journey of bringing these two women together through Mary Wollstonecraft's scandalous marriage to a poet, all the way through her writing Frankenstein, which, if you don't know the story of how that happens, I'm not going to spoil it because it's very fun. And them both just being in the world and creating incredible art and things that are still written and talked about today. As discussed in the intro, this is a triple timeline book. So there's a timeline in Berlin, 1933, that follows Althea, an American-born author who's invited to Berlin by the Nazi regime to see Berlin, and she sees all of the lovely things that they put in front of her, all of the propaganda, and then she is finally invited to see the real side of Berlin when she's invited to do so by a young woman that she meets. Another piece of the timeline is Paris 1936, where we follow Hannah, who is running from Berlin and the anti-Semitism of Nazis, and finds herself in Paris, where she's trying to outrun her past and all the terrible things that happened to her while she was in Berlin. And she throws herself into her work, which is working at the German Library of Burned Books and taking care of those books and recognizing their importance and what she would do to protect those books. The third timeline is 1944 New York, where we follow Vivian, whose husband died fighting in France, and she is in a battle with a senator who is trying to censor the books that get shipped to service men and women across the different theaters of World War II in order to pick up their spirits and allow them to have something to do when they aren't fighting. And she is battling with the senator about censorship around these words. And she finds an interesting ally at the Library of Banned Books in Brooklyn. It's a really fascinating story that weaves these two women together, and a very interesting job in intertwining facts and the fate of these three women and why books matter so much in a world at war. Now, seemingly, these two books have nothing in common. 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. They're hundreds of years apart. Seemingly, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. I read them a week apart, and for no other reason than it just happened. Those were the books that were in my TBR pile that I felt inspired to read, and I'm really glad that I did. One of the things that this book talks about at the end, as Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley story unfolds, is at the end of this book, I won't ruin the ending, but there is a quote at the end of the book that spans both mother and daughter that talks about the idea of dare to know. By Mary Wollstonecraft daring to know more than what the world wanted her to know, she changed the world. By writing so other people could dare to know more, she changed the world. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley wrote the first ever science fiction book when she wrote Frankenstein, and did it as a 18-year-old woman. That is unheard of and shockingly not talked about enough. It's absolutely incredible what these two women did in the literary world, and they changed the world just by daring to know more than what society wanted them to know at the time that they were living. Now, not only presently in the 21st century, but also in the 21st century, women had far more education than they did when Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley were living on this earth, which is great. We love education. That's an important thing. It's wonderful. However, what we see in this book is how knowledge is still so important because it's still under threat from people who don't want people to know more. Because knowledge is power. Just by knowing a little bit more, by reading somebody else's experience, by finding a book that sympathizes with somebody else, there's a little bit more compassion put out in the world, and that makes the world a better place. And that scares the people who burn those books, who ban those books, who don't want those books out in our world. So I found that it was a very beautiful connection to me that all of these women were daring to know and hoping that the world would follow with them to know a little bit more and make the world a little bit of a better place. Now, I would recommend both of these books. I really like a historical fiction book that is about somebody's life and talking about what they did. I also recognize that that's not everyone's cup of tea. So if you're not a big fan of closer to biographical historical fiction, please don't read this. You won't enjoy it. But I really enjoyed it and found it very inspiring, and really liked getting to hear both of these women's story unfold and the connection that mother and daughter had, even though they never got to know each other. I also really enjoyed this, as the front cover says. If you are a fan of historical fiction that features courageous women, this is for you. It was an interesting read. I really liked getting to see how all of their lives intertwined and where these women showed up in unexpected places. So I really enjoyed this. So I would recommend them both. I hope you have an absolutely phenomenal weekend and that you get to find some time to pick up a book and learn a little bit more about somebody else, about another world, whatever you decide to read. I would love to hear what it is that you are daring to know more about. Have a great weekend. Happy reading.